I knew something was off the second I pulled that thick cream-colored envelope out of my mailbox. It wasn't the usual junk, no grocery coupons or water bills. No, this one had weight to it. Literally. It was hefty, like it had something important to say, and on the front, it had the words Silverwood Meadows Homeowners Association embossed in gold script. Fancy. I didn't even need to open it to know it was bad news. Around here, envelopes like that didn't bring good tidings, they brought headaches. And fines. And, apparently, wars. I carried the envelope inside like it might explode if I opened it wrong, walked past my plain white work van sitting peacefully in the driveway, and dropped the rest of the mail on the counter. With a butter knife, because I refused to give it the honor of my real letter opener, I slid it open. A single page, worded in the kind of bureaucratic poetry that only HOAs can master, greeted me with, "This letter serves as formal notification of a violation of the Silverwood Meadows covenants, conditions, and restrictions." I skimmed past the legalese, already dreading what flavor of ridiculousness they'd cooked up this time. And there it was. Pursuant to Bylaw 8, Section 2, Subsection B, no commercial vehicle may be parked in a residential driveway. They had flagged my van, my plain, unmarked, slightly too vanilla white Ford Transit, as a commercial violation. Now, to be clear, this van didn't have logos. It didn't have ladders or toolboxes or neon orange cones. It was cleaner than some of the BMWs on the block. But apparently, because I used it for work, specifically for mobile blood collection, they saw it as a threat to the aesthetic sanctity of the neighborhood. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. There were landscapers with trailers parked in cul-de-sacs every day, Amazon vans buzzing through like clockwork, and Dave, 2 houses down, drove a lifted red Dodge Ram with monster truck tires. No one seemed to mind that. But my van, quiet and functional, was somehow the enemy? I figured the smart move was to talk it out. You know, neighbor to neighbor. That was my first mistake. I walked next door to talk to Jeanette Hollingsworth, Silverwood's HOA president, and apparently self-appointed guardian of all things symmetrical and beige. She was elbow-deep in a rose bush, wearing spotless white gloves and a sun visor big enough to orbit the moon. "Hey, Jeanette," I said, trying to sound casual. "You got a sec?" She didn't look up, just kept snipping at a perfectly healthy branch like it had personally insulted her. "If it's about the letter," she said, her voice clipped and cold, "then no, I don't have a second." "Well," I said, still trying to play nice, "it's just my work van. No signage. No mess. It's cleaner than most of the cars on this street." I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. She finally looked up at me with those eyes that could detect a weed through 2 layers of concrete. "It's not a misunderstanding, Caleb," she said, using that tone people say for toddlers and trespassers. "It's a violation. This is a residential community, not a place to run your little business." "It's not a business," I replied, doing my best to stay calm. "It's a mobile blood donation unit. I work for a nonprofit. We collect blood from local offices, schools. It's for hospitals." "That doesn't change what it is," she snapped. "It's a commercial vehicle, and it's not allowed. You have 14 days to remove it, or we'll start daily fines." She turned back to her roses, and that was that. Conversation over. For the next week, I tried everything. I wrote a formal appeal to the HOA. I offered to park on the street. I even said I'd build a shed to hide it. Nothing worked. When I showed up for my appeal hearing, it was just Jeanette and her 2 loyal board members, Greg, who once cited a neighbor for having mismatched flower pots, and Mrs. Darnell, who hadn't looked up from her knitting since 2006. They listened with the enthusiasm of DMV employees on a Friday afternoon. I explained the van's purpose, how it helped collect hundreds of pints of life-saving blood every month, how it didn't violate the spirit of the rule, only the letter. But Jeanette clutched her rulebook like it was the Constitution. "We can't make exceptions," she said, with a gavel she brought from home, like this was the Supreme Court. "If we bend the rules for you, next it'll be food trucks, then junkyards." They gave me 6 days. The next morning, I met Dave, the contractor I'd hired to build a patio in my backyard. He pulled up in a rusty F-150 with Dave's concrete and more scrawled on a magnetic sign. The truck bed looked like it belonged to a man who wrestled gravel for a living. "All right, where you want the patio?" he barked cheerfully, shaking my hand with the force of a sledgehammer. Before I could answer, Jeanette came marching out of her house like a one-woman SWAT team. "You can't park that here," she said, pointing at Dave's truck like it had insulted her hydrangeas. Dave blinked. "I'm pouring concrete. You want me to haul 5 tons by hand?" The rules are the rules, she declared, arms crossed. Dave looked at me, then back at her. Fine. Your kingdom, your call. He drove the truck to the end of the street and spent the entire day hauling tools by hand. But in that moment, Dave became more than a contractor, he became an ally. 3 days later, things came to a head. I came home to find a police cruiser parked behind my van. A young cop stood by it, clipboard in hand. Jeanette's silhouette loomed in her window like a cartoon villain. Problem, officer? I asked. Got a report of an illegally parked commercial vehicle, he said, not unkindly. It's on the street. That's legal, right? Only for 4 hours at a time, he replied. City ordinance. I sighed. It's a mobile blood bank. The officer paused. A what? A mobile blood bank. I'm a phlebotomist. We use this van to collect blood donations for hospitals. His expression changed. He looked at the van again, really looked at it. Then slowly, quietly, he tore the citation in half and said, well, that's not exactly the kind of vehicle I think this ordinance was written for. Have a good night. That was the moment the idea struck. What if I didn't just tell them? What if I showed them? That night, on my half-finished patio, Dave, his crew, and I hatched a plan. We called it Operation Lifeblood. The idea? Turn my driveway into the site of a neighborhood blood drive. A legitimate, registered, health department-approved blood drive. Dave called in a favor from a buddy with a print shop. The next morning, we had 300 glossy flyers. Silverwood Cares give the gift of life. My address was listed as the event site. Cookies and juice included. We went door to door. And to our surprise, people were excited. Not just excited, enthusiastic. Apparently, Jeanette had made enemies across the block. From known bands to garbage bin citations, she had ruled with an iron trowel, and people were ready for change. Mrs. Delaney told us, she said my wind chime was too whimsical. I'll be there with my whole bridge club. Even Greg's own nephew said. She banned my skateboard ramp. She's a menace. We set up tents, chairs, coolers of juice. I brought in Maria, one of our actual blood techs. She arrived with gloves, donor charts, and that no-nonsense energy that says, I've seen worse than your HOA. Saturday morning arrived clear and bright. At 10 a.m. sharp, I backed the van into the driveway, opened the doors, and flipped on the lights. Maria began setting up donor stations. The patio became a pop-up clinic. Then, one by one, the neighbors arrived. By 10:30, we had a line. At 10:37, the clouds rolled in, not in the sky, but in the form of Jeanette, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed like she was about to conduct a military inspection. What is the meaning of this? She demanded. It's a blood drive. I replied calmly, handing her a flyer. We're saving lives. Want a cookie? This is unauthorized. You're violating multiple covenants. Nope, I said. City ordinance allows medical events. This is public health. And judging by the turnout, I gestured to the happy crowd of donors, kids eating cookies, and a mom blogger filming everything on her phone. Jeanette sputtered. Literally. Then Mrs. Delaney chimed in. My grandson needed a transfusion last year. This, she pointed to the van, is more helpful than another email about mailbox paint. Jeanette looked around at the smiles, the laughter, the community she'd claimed to protect, and realized she was outnumbered, outmatched, outmaneuvered. She turned on her heel and stormed off. A few days later, her resignation was quietly posted on the HOA website. Greg, surprisingly, became interim president. His first act? Removing Bylaw 8 Section 2 Subsection B. Now, my van sits peacefully in the driveway. No drama. No fines. Just a symbol of what happens when people stand together, not just to protest, but to build something better. So let me ask you this. What matters more, how something looks, or what it does? Would you support a rule that bans blood drives if it meant your neighborhood stayed picture perfect? Or do you believe, like I do, that doing good should always come before looking good? Drop a comment. Let's hear it. Where do you draw the line in your neighborhood? And if you've got your own HOA story, believe me, I want to hear it.